Hello, I'm Sheila Sage. Welcome to Early Years Workshop. I've got a group of experts with me here today. Jed Cotton, who's an infant head teacher from Hove, Diane Rich, who's an early years consultant, and our special guest, Jane Hackett, who's a foundation stage manager. Jane, Canterbury Cross is a large, diverse primary school, isn't it? Tell us a little bit about it.
The nursery where I work has up to 78 children on roll. Now, these children come from many, many cultures. Yes. They're mainly of Muslim faith. They speak a variety of languages.
But this gives you a wonderful diversity, doesn't it?
It certainly does, because we base everything that we can on the children. They bring with them a wealth of experiences.
When we think about assessing children, we have to remember that it's the educator's main responsibility to ensure that children learn. And part of assessment is learning as educators what those children have picked up, what they know, what they understand, what they're interested in. And with these children, we're only going to find that out by having your bilingual adults working with them.
So shall we see some of what happens in your nursery?
Where should she put the sunflowers? She put some of them on a table. Big Ted said, No, Molly. That's not what you do with the seeds.
Big Ted hoise. Na, Molly. Bisiti ta koronya.
He said, you have to. What do you have to do, Danielle? You have to put it in the soil.
Big Ted hoise. Bistaki jodi gaছ তুলতে চাও তে মাটির ভিতরে হারানি লাগে.
If you do all of those things, you will grow a beautiful sunflower.
Big Ted hoise যদি ওটা সফলতা করো তে সুন্দর সানফ্লাওয়ার উঠবো.
Wasn't it lovely when those children understood in Bengali and we heard the laughter?
I think it shows how important it is to use bilingual staff in the way you do. Children think in their home and community language, and when their home and community language isn't English, they do need to experience hearing their own language within their setting, and this is what you're providing for them.
Jane, I would imagine that in a very busy nursery environment, you're not going to be able to focus on all of the children at the same time, because they're all doing so many different things.
That's right. That's the importance of having a planning meeting at the start of the morning or the start of the afternoon. And during that time, we might decide to focus on a couple of children during that particular session.
And one of those was Amani.
Yes, it was.
And we're going to have a look at how you assessed some of the things Amani did.
That's it, no more. I did one more. Yeah, one more. That's it. A small garden in the middle of soil. Yeah. Gotta make. I'm gonna show Mrs. Hackett.
It's lovely. How does it feel?
Good.
What does it feel like?
And stuff.
There's lots of glittery things and sticks. Whoops, careful.
Stick.
If you say, excuse me, please may I have a stick, somebody might pass them to you. There we go. Lots of goodies.
So you were making informal assessments there. Did you write those down or?
No, those are the mental ongoing notes.
Yes.
You could possibly jot something like that onto a post-it note. But I think a lot of these are all the little mental notes that, you know, a good practitioner will make.
And then you discuss that with all the co-workers?
At another meeting, yes.
It was interesting when you were undertaking the assessment on Amani. Did you have a particular focus in mind? And if so, how might that relate to future planning for her?
When we were talking about our planning at the start of the morning, we talked about Amani and how she's very dominant in her play, and we wanted to see if there was any way in which we could encourage her to be part of play, but to also allow the other children to lead that play rather than to take over all the time.
So I'm assuming your next steps in planning would be opportunities for Amani to perhaps play with one other, sometimes a practitioner who would model sharing and working together, or sometimes there might be another child that Amani particularly gets on well with, and that there's an opportunity for them to role play together or play with small world toys together, or just two children together in that soil tray, because it's quite a challenge, isn't it, for children to work in a larger group, and for the nursery children it's sometimes very difficult.
Would you always have all the areas of learning to assess, or would you just focus on one, two?
I think it depends on the situation. I think that there's assessment where you want to get greater detail, presumably, in a particular area of learning where you've noticed and observed certain things about a child, but also within the rich array of experiences that nurseries would offer, then observing or following or tracking a child will generate a wealth of information across all 6 areas of learning. And I think it's very much dependent on particular child's needs and, I suppose, the logistics of staffing and organisation at the time.
And sometimes you notice things that you just hadn't planned at all.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And whilst you were making assessments of Amani, Saida was involved with a smaller group making more formal assessments. Let's see.
What are those?
Legs.
Legs? How many legs is it?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Had you organised exactly what Saida was going to observe?
Yes, we had. In this particular case, I wanted Saida to be looking at the mathematical development of the children, and that's what she was assessing there in that clip.
Jed, with your QCA hat on, your background, do you recognise all these different ways of building up a profile as being equally valid?
Yes, I think that validity is in the usefulness of something. I mean, there was a lot of post-it stickers there, and obviously building up individual children's profiles, there's going to be too much information that you can put in at any one time.
Yeah, don't you think there's still a worry out there amongst practitioners about exactly what assessment is and how they do it?
Yes, I mean, assessment has become so high-profilely integral to practice, but clearly what people write down varies enormously. And I think that, you know, quality assessment, the focus needs to be on learning, and people need to have a clear idea about what children are learning at the various activities and how children are demonstrating the many things that they know and finding the right shorthand to do that, because obviously we do need to invest time in observations, but there is still this tension that time could be better spent involving directly in talking at or with children and not actually listening to what they say to make the quality improved in the future.
Yes, it's that time. People feel guilty, don't they, if they're standing back from children sometimes.
Yes, I think they should always be interacting with the children. In actual fact, some of the best interaction is maybe to stand back out of it and to be that fly on the wall as an observer.
And you targeted Fatima for a slightly more formal assessment, which we can see now.
Oops. Find a green one. What's that, Tasneem?
Flower.
Flower. Green killer.
Were you mainly writing a description of what Fatima was doing, or were you looking at the development for the next stage?
She was another little girl that we targeted. She's much, much quieter. She prefers adult-led activities. So I think what I wanted to see was, does she actually interact with the other children?
Jed, can you give us an example of something that might be very useful in assessment terms and something that might not be very useful?
Well, I think what would be useful for assessment would be, for example, information about whether that was the first time that had been noticed, the child's particular demeanour during the activity. Was she very enthusiastic? Did she appear shy? Less useful things may just be comments about how many straws she used, whether she interacted but without giving any detail about the interaction during the context of the activity.
I think sometimes that sort of thing can really tell us about our practice. And when we find that what we're offering children isn't telling us much about children's learning, it's a cue to us to wake up and say, hang on a minute, let me now look at what I'm providing children with. Yes. Quality experience for children will give quality opportunities to observe, and then we'll be really learning about our children.
When you're observing children outside, does that give a different flavour to the assessment?
Oh, I think most definitely. I mean, the outside environment is essential because it offers different opportunities that you can't create inside. And I mean, at the risk of a stereotype, I'm sure that it creates a lot of assessment opportunities for boys who seem to need more space to be active and can demonstrate many of their skills and knowledge.
And what help would you give to people about doing their observations?
Well, I would bring in Fatima. If you've noticed particular things, or if you've noticed, as you've said, that Fatima likes to choose activities where there's an adult, you could tell Fatima that and see what she says. And maybe you're wrong. Maybe there are times when actually you're not focusing on Fatima and she's away in the climbing frame on her own, or she's in the home corner on her own. There might be things that you haven't noticed that she could actually tell you.
So it's about discussing what goes on and perhaps using the child as well.
Yeah.
I think that's very helpful.
I think it's about coming back to what we remind ourselves as the role of the educator and practitioner, and that is to ensure that children learn. But in doing that, we're looking at children, we're listening to children, we're tuning into children all the time, finding out how are they learning? Are they learning by the way I've provided these activities? Are they learning through the way I've organised these things? What does what they're doing tell me about them? What does what they're doing tell me about what I next need to do?
And then it's looking back then at those observations that you've made and discussing them with your team.
Yes.
And saying, well, how can we then take on this learning? How can we become more involved with the children?
Yes. We want all our children to be explorers. And I think if any child goes home at the end of the day and they haven't felt as if they're explorers in their world, we've actually let them down.
I think you're right, Diane. Assessment tells you as much about the opportunities offered to children as it does about the children themselves. And that's all from Early Years Workshop today. I'd like to thank my guests and especially Jane Hackett. Thank you. And from all of us here, goodbye.